So we're going to now look at ways to go about showing first-degree murder. And I want to talk about the little snippet that you have of the Elliot case. When you opened up this particular file, you might have thought, well, this isn't the whole case, and it's certainly not. But I wanted to give you the part of this California case called People versus Elliot. And let me share my screen with you, and we'll just look at that whole thing. And there it is. So in People versus Elliot, the California Supreme Court gives us some ways to think about trying to figure out whether someone desired to take another human being's life. Now, that sounds like it's not that hard to do, to figure out, but it turns out on the ground, when you're actually looking at a real set of facts, it turns out to be a very difficult thing to do. So in Elliot, the California Supreme Court gives us 3 things we should look for to try to discover whether someone intentionally killed another human being. And of course, California, much like every other state, and certainly like Pennsylvania, requires first-degree murder to be, in this particular version, a premeditated and deliberate killing. So the court says we look for evidence of planning, motive, and method. And we look for these things because, quite obviously, we can't hook some kind of a machine to a person's head and try to figure out what's inside of it. So we look for these 3 things: evidence of planning, motive, and method. Now, you will, if you look at Lefebvre's Horn book on criminal law, which is really a great one to kind of give you a grounding in this area. There's a student Horn book by Wayne R. Lefebvre. It's really worth buying. You will learn there, and you'll learn in any other place you go, that motive is not a requirement for first-degree murder. Not a requirement. But you'll notice in People versus Elliot, the court says that motive, planning, and method are things we should look for to determine whether there wasn't the intent to kill. So it's not required. So motive is not required, but that the evidence the person thought about it and the way they went about it are all telltale signs that the intent was there. When you have something when you have a case where one of these 3 categories is not present, the court in People versus Elliot says we'll want to see a little bit more from one of the other categories. Now, you'll find that courts require much less than you'd expect in each of these areas to show that the killing has qualified as first-degree murder. But what I like about this Elliot case is that it's recognized as a nice sort of grounding point. We look at this as sort of a starting point. Are those 3 things present? If they are, then you absolutely have first-degree murder. Not required, but this case is a nice guide, or the standard that I give you from this case is a really nice guide to beginning to understand whether premeditation, deliberation, and intent have been satisfied. Because remember, in all these cases, in trying to establish the thoughts inside of a person's head, we're never going to be able to read those directly. Sometimes you'll have things like text messages or ransom notes or threatening letters, but that's not going to be the usual case. So usually for a person's state of mind, we're going to have to rely on what that person has done externally. And of course, letters and text are themselves also external documents. They're not actually literally what's going on in the person's head, though we believe them to be closer than the fact that a bomb was used or poison was used. So what we're looking at in these cases is a way to reconstruct or to construct what we think is going on inside of a person's head. And these 3 categories by the Elliot case, offered in the Elliot case, planning, motive, and method of killing, are pretty good ways to think about whether the thoughts inside of a person's head were the desire to kill.